The stagecoach rattled into Tucson, Arizona Territory, on a scorching afternoon in June of 1878, and Clara Mae Hartley pressed her hand against her mouth the moment she saw the crowded depot, a habit so deeply ingrained that she scarcely noticed she was doing it anymore. She had traveled all the way from Philadelphia, where her aunt had finally succumbed to consumption, leaving Clara with nothing but a trunk of plain dresses and a letter from a distant cousin offering work at a boarding house in this dusty frontier town. At 22 years old, Clara had learned to make herself small, to speak softly, and above all, to never smile where anyone could see. Her teeth grew in crooked and overlapping, a twisted fence of ivory that had earned her cruel names from childhood onward, and though her aunt had been kind enough to take her in after her parents died, there had never been money for anything beyond survival, certainly not for the sort of dentist who might have straightened what nature had bent. The heat hit her like a physical force as she stepped down from the coach, her dark blue traveling dress already clinging to her skin with perspiration. The depot bustled with activity, men in wide-brimmed hats and dusty boots moving cargo, women in calico dresses shepherding children through the crowd, and everywhere the smell of horses, leather, and sun-baked earth. Clara kept her carpetbag close and her eyes down, asking directions in a voice barely above a whisper, one hand still hovering near her lips as though she might need to catch any words that escaped too visibly. The boarding house stood on a side street, a two-story adobe structure with a wooden porch that had seen better days. A woman with steel-gray hair and a no-nonsense expression answered Clara's knock, looking her up and down with the assessing gaze of someone who had seen too many girls come and go to waste time on pleasantries. "You are the Hartley girl from back east?" she asked, and Clara nodded, managing a small sound of agreement without actually opening her mouth. "I am Mrs. Brennan. You will work for your room and board, helping with cooking, cleaning, and laundry. The men who stay here are miners, ranch hands, and drifters mostly. You keep your distance from them except when serving meals, understood?" Clara nodded again, relief washing through her that she had found the right place, that she would have a roof over her head in this strange and overwhelming territory. Mrs. Brennan showed her to a small room at the back of the second floor, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand, but it was clean and it was hers, and that was more than Clara had dared hope for during the long journey west. The work began immediately, and Clara threw herself into it with the desperate energy of someone who knew she had no alternative. She rose before dawn to help Mrs. Brennan prepare breakfast for the dozen men who currently rented rooms, keeping her eyes on her tasks and her mouth firmly closed. She served plates of beans, bacon, and biscuits with efficient silence, refilling coffee cups and clearing dishes without engaging in the rough banter that flowed around the table. The men barely seemed to notice her, which was exactly how Clara preferred it. Invisibility had become her armor, silence her shield. 3 weeks passed in this manner, the days blending together in a haze of heat and hard work. Clara learned the rhythms of the boarding house, the temperaments of the regular boarders, and the shortcuts that made the endless tasks marginally easier. She learned which men were respectful and which required a wide berth, though Mrs. Brennan ran a tight establishment and had no tolerance for impropriety. In the evenings, after the dishes were washed and put away, Clara would sometimes sit on the back step and watch the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of orange and purple, marveling that she had come so far from the gray streets of Philadelphia, wondering if she would ever feel at home in this wild, raw place. It was on a Tuesday morning in mid-July when everything changed, though Clara had no premonition of it as she went about her usual tasks. She was in the kitchen, helping Mrs. Brennan knead dough for the noon meal when they heard the commotion out front, the sound of horses and men's voices raised in greeting. Mrs. Brennan wiped her hands on her apron and went to investigate, returning a moment later with instructions for Clara to prepare the front room upstairs, as they would be taking on a new boarder. "He is a cattleman," Mrs. Brennan said, her tone carrying a note of approval. "Been working on the ranches south of here, but is looking to start his own operation. Comes with good references, and he paid a month in advance, so you make sure that room is spotless." Clara set to work immediately, carrying fresh linens up the narrow stairs to the room at the front of the house, the one with windows that caught the morning light. She stripped the bed and remade it with tight, neat corners, swept the floor until not a speck of dust remained, and filled the wash basin with clean water from the pump. She was just finishing, tucking the last corner of the quilt into place, when she heard boots on the stairs, heavy and measured. She turned toward the door, intending to slip out quickly before the new boarder arrived, but she was too late. He appeared in the doorway, and Clara found herself frozen, caught in the middle of the room with nowhere to hide. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled the doorframe and sun-bronzed skin that spoke of years spent outdoors. His hair was the color of wheat at harvest, slightly too long and curling at the collar of his shirt, and his eyes were an unexpected shade of blue-gray, like the sky before a storm. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowman, denim trousers and a chambray shirt, boots that had seen hard use, and a hat that he removed as soon as he saw her. "Afternoon, miss," he said, his voice a low drawl that carried the accent of Texas or perhaps Oklahoma. "I am sorry if I startled you." "I am James Dalton, though most folks call me Dal." Clara felt her heart hammering in her chest, panic rising as she realized she would have to respond, would have to speak to this stranger who was looking at her with open, friendly curiosity. She managed a tiny nod, her hand coming up automatically to cover her mouth, and mumbled something that might have been a greeting, though the words were swallowed by her palm and her own fear. "Did not catch that," Dal said, not unkindly, taking a step into the room and setting his saddlebags on the chair by the window. "You work here at the boarding house." Clara nodded again, more vigorously this time, and then darted toward the door, desperate to escape before he could ask anything else, before she had to reveal the twisted mess of her teeth to this man with his easy manner and his storm-colored eyes. But in her haste, she misjudged the distance, her foot catching on the edge of the rag rug, and suddenly she was falling, her arms windmilling uselessly as she pitched forward. Strong hands caught her before she hit the floor, Dal moving with surprising speed for someone of his size. He steadied her, his grip firm but gentle on her upper arms, and for a moment they stood there, frozen in an awkward tableau, Clara's face turned up toward his out of pure instinct, her hand fallen away from her mouth in the shock of nearly falling. "Are you all right?" Dal asked, genuine concern in his voice, and then he smiled at her, a slow, warm expression that lit up his entire face. "That was a close one. These old floors are not always even. You have to watch your step." Clara realized with dawning horror that her mouth was uncovered, that he was looking directly at her face, that there was no way he could miss the crooked disorder of her teeth. She waited for the inevitable response, the slight recoil, the flicker of disgust or pity that she had seen so many times before. But it did not come. Instead, Dal just kept smiling, his hands still steadying her, his eyes warm and kind. "You have got the sweetest smile I think I have ever seen," he said, the words simple and matter-of-fact, as though he were commenting on the weather or the quality of the furniture. "Thank you for getting the room ready. I can tell you put a lot of care into it." Clara stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard, certain she must have misunderstood. But before she could formulate any response, Dal released her arms and stepped back, giving her space, his expression still friendly and open. She bolted then, fleeing the room like a startled deer, her cheeks burning with embarrassment and confusion, her mind replaying his words over and over. The sweetest smile. He had called her smile sweet. It made no sense. It had to be mockery, some cruel joke she did not yet understand. She avoided him for the rest of that day and all of the next, timing her movements to minimize any chance of encounter, serving his meals with her face turned away, and her responses to Mrs. Brennan's instructions delivered in whispers. But the boarding house was not large, and Dal seemed to be the sort of man who noticed things, who paid attention to the people around him. On the third day after his arrival, Clara was hanging laundry in the small yard behind the house, the morning sun already fierce overhead, when she heard his voice behind her. "Morning, miss. I was wondering if you could tell me where I might find a good stable in town. I am looking to board my horse somewhere with decent care while I am looking for land." Clara jumped, nearly dropping the sheet she had been pinning to the line, and turned to find Dal standing a respectful distance away, his hat shading his eyes but his expression visible and friendly. She pointed vaguely in the direction of the main street, her hand coming up reflexively to cover her mouth, and managed to mumble something about the livery near the hotel. "Much obliged," Dal said, but he made no move to leave. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying her with that same curious attention he had shown in his room. "You know, I have been here 3 days, and I still do not know your name. Seems a shame, given as how you are taking such good care of all of us rough characters." She hesitated, torn between the ingrained impulse to flee and the realization that he was being genuinely kind, that there was nothing mocking or cruel in his tone. Finally, she lowered her hand just enough to whisper, "Clara, Clara Hartley." "Clara," Dal repeated, as though testing the sound of it. "That is a real pretty name, suits you." He smiled again, that same warm, open expression, and Clara felt something twist in her chest, something she could not quite name. "I will let you get back to your work, Miss Clara. Just wanted to say good morning." He tipped his hat and walked away, leaving Clara standing amid the drying laundry, her thoughts in complete disarray. She had spent so many years being invisible, being overlooked or scorned, that she had no framework for understanding simple kindness from a man like Dal. She tried to tell herself it meant nothing, that he was just polite by nature, that he would soon lose interest or realize his mistake. But some small, stubborn part of her, a part she had thought long dead, wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, he had meant what he said. The days that followed established a pattern that was both unsettling and oddly comforting. Dal greeted Clara each morning at breakfast, always with a smile and a kind word, never seeming to notice or care that she barely responded beyond the briefest nods and whispered syllables. He asked her opinion on small matters, where to find a good blacksmith, what time the general store closed, whether the water from the well was safe to drink straight. He never pressed when she kept her answers short and her face averted, never made her feel foolish or strange for her reticence. Other men came and went from the boarding house, some staying a few days, others a few weeks. But Dal became a fixture, his presence steady and reliable. Clara learned that he was 26 years old, that he had been working cattle since he was 14, that he had saved nearly every dollar he earned with the goal of buying his own ranch someday. He spoke of land and livestock with a passion that made his eyes light up, describing the kind of operation he wanted to build, modest at first but with room to grow, a place where he could put down roots after years of drifting. "I have been thinking about settling in this territory for a while now," he told Mrs. Brennan over supper one evening, his words carrying across the table to where Clara was serving. "The land is good, and there is room for a man to build something that will last. I have been looking at parcels north of town near where the creek runs year-round. Hard work, but I have never been afraid of that." Clara found herself listening more than she should, found herself curious about this man who spoke of the future with such certainty, such hope. It was a foreign concept to her, planning beyond the immediate need for survival. She had spent so long just trying to get through each day that the idea of building something permanent, something lasting, seemed almost fantastical. August arrived with temperatures that made the July heat seem mild by comparison. The boarding house became an oven during the day, and everyone moved slowly, conserving energy and seeking shade whenever possible. Clara rose even earlier than usual, trying to finish the heaviest chores before the sun reached its peak. One morning, as she was hauling water from the pump for laundry, she felt the world tilt sideways, her vision graying at the edges. She set the bucket down quickly, bracing herself against the pump handle, fighting the wave of dizziness that threatened to pull her under. "Whoa there, easy now," Dal's voice came from somewhere close, and then his hand was on her elbow, steadying her. "When did you last eat something, Miss Clara? Or drink some water?" She could not remember. Breakfast had been busy, and she had been focused on serving everyone else, on cleaning up afterward, on starting the endless cycle of daily tasks. Dal guided her to the shade of the back porch, his movements gentle but firm, and disappeared into the house before she could protest. He returned with a tin cup of water and a biscuit left over from the morning meal. "You drink all of that," he instructed, pressing the cup into her hands. "And eat that biscuit. This heat is nothing to fool around with. You have to take care of yourself." Clara obeyed, too dizzy to argue, sipping the water slowly and nibbling at the biscuit while Dal sat beside her on the step, his presence solid and reassuring. When the dizziness finally receded, she turned to thank him, forgetting for a moment to keep her hand over her mouth, and found him watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You work too hard," he said quietly. "Mrs. Brennan is getting her money's worth out of you and then some." He paused, then added, "You do not have to hide from me, you know. I meant what I said before. You have got a real sweet smile." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, sudden and unexpected. "You do not have to lie to me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know what I look like." Dal's eyebrows drew together in genuine confusion. "Lie, Miss Clara, I have never lied to a lady in my life, and I am not about to start now." He shifted, turning to face her more fully. "If you are talking about your teeth being a little crooked, well, I have seen a lot worse. And honestly, it does not change that you have kind eyes and a real pretty way about you. Besides, a smile is not about how straight your teeth are. It is about what is behind it." She stared at him, searching his face for any trace of mockery or pity, but finding only sincerity. "People have always," she started, then had to stop, gathering courage. "They have always been cruel about it, since I was a child." "Then those people were fools," Dal said firmly. "And their cruelty says everything about them and nothing about you." He stood, offering her his hand to help her up. "Now, I am going to talk to Mrs. Brennan about you taking a break during the hottest part of the day. There is no sense in you working yourself sick." Before Clara could protest, he was striding into the house and she was left on the porch, her world tilting once again, but this time from emotion rather than heat exhaustion. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever cared enough to notice when she was struggling. The feeling was so foreign, so overwhelming that she did not know what to do with it. True to his word, Dal spoke to Mrs. Brennan, and the older woman, perhaps recognizing good sense when she heard it, agreed that Clara should rest for 2 hours each afternoon during the worst of the heat. It meant adjusting the work schedule, meant getting up even earlier, but it also meant that Clara had time to sit in her small room with the window open, catching whatever breeze might stir, letting her body recover from the morning's labors. Dal took to joining her on the back porch in the evenings, after supper was cleaned up, and the other boarders had dispersed to the saloons or their rooms. He never asked permission, just appeared with 2 cups of coffee or cool water, settling onto the step and talking about his day, about the land he was looking at, about his plans. At first, Clara barely responded, listening in tongue-tied silence, but gradually as the days passed, she began to offer small comments, brief observations, the beginnings of actual conversation. "I put in an offer on a section north of town," Dal told her one evening in late August, excitement evident in his voice. "It has good water, decent grass, and a small cabin that needs work but is livable. If the owner accepts, I will be moving out there come September." Clara felt an unexpected pang at the thought of him leaving, which was ridiculous given that she had known him less than 2 months, and had spent most of that time avoiding him. But the evenings on the porch had become something she looked forward to, a bright spot in the repetitive routine of her days. The thought of them ending left her feeling hollow. "That sounds wonderful," she managed to say, and meant it, even as her heart sank. "You will finally have your ranch." "It is a start anyway," Dal said. "Small herd to begin with, maybe 20 or 30 head if I can work out a good price. Build from there." He was quiet for a moment, then added, almost casually, "It is a lot of work for one man, though. I have been thinking I will need to hire some help eventually. And it would be nice to have someone to share it with, make it a real home instead of just a place to work myself to death." Clara did not know how to respond to that, so she said nothing, sipping her water and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. She had never let herself think about such things, about homes and futures and someone to share them with. Those were dreams for other women, women who were pretty and confident, women who did not have to hide their smiles. But sitting there with Dal, listening to the warmth in his voice as he described his hopes, she felt the faintest flicker of something dangerous. Hope. The next week brought news that Dal's offer had been accepted. He came back to the boarding house one afternoon practically glowing with excitement, buying a round of drinks for all the boarders, and talking a mile a minute about his plans. He would move to the property in 3 days, he said, would start repairs on the cabin immediately, would ride down to check on cattle prices. It was happening. His dream was becoming real. Clara felt genuinely happy for him, even as she braced herself for the return to her previous invisible existence. She told herself it had been nice while it lasted, that she should be grateful for the brief experience of being seen, being talked to like a person who mattered. She prepared herself to go back to the shadows. But on Dal's last evening at the boarding house, after supper had been cleared and the other men had gone their separate ways, he sought her out in the kitchen where she was finishing the dishes. Mrs. Brennan had already retired to her room, leaving Clara alone with the soapy water and her thoughts. "Miss Clara," Dal said from the doorway, his hat in his hands, "could I talk to you for a moment? Outside, maybe." Her heart jumped into her throat, but she dried her hands on her apron and followed him out to the back porch, the familiar spot where they had spent so many evenings. The night was cooler than it had been, a hint that autumn would eventually arrive even in this desert territory. Dal did not sit down, and neither did Clara, both of them standing in the semi-darkness, the light from the kitchen window casting long shadows. "I have been thinking," Dal started, then stopped, seeming uncharacteristically uncertain. "I have been thinking a lot, actually, about moving out to the ranch, about starting this new chapter. And the thing is, Miss Clara, I cannot stop thinking about how much better it would be if you were there too." Clara's breath caught. "What?" "I know this is sudden," Dal continued, the words coming faster now as though he needed to get them all out before he lost his nerve. "And I know we have not known each other long. But I have spent near about every evening of the past 6 weeks sitting with you, talking with you, and I have come to care about you a great deal. More than I probably should, given the circumstances." He took a step closer, his eyes seeking hers in the dim light. "You are kind and hardworking and thoughtful, and when you do smile, really smile, it lights up everything around you. I meant what I said that first day. It is the sweetest thing I have ever seen." "Dal, Clara started, but he held up a hand, asking for patience. "Let me finish, please, because I might lose my courage otherwise." He took a deep breath. "I am not a rich man, and I cannot promise you an easy life. Ranching is hard work, and there will be lean times along with the good. But I can promise that I will work every day to build something solid, something lasting. And I can promise that I will treat you with respect and kindness, that I will value you and care for you the best way I know how." He paused, then said the words that changed everything. "Miss Clara, would you consider being my wife? Would you come to the ranch with me and help me build a home?" Clara felt as though she could not breathe, could not think, could not process what she was hearing. This man, this good, hard-working, kind man, was asking her to marry him. Her with her crooked teeth and her invisible life and her complete lack of anything to offer. It had to be a dream, it had to be some kind of mistake. "Why?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. "Why would you want me?" Because you are you, Dal said simply. Because in all my years of drifting from place to place, I have never met anyone who made me want to stay until now. Because when I think about my future, about that ranch and building a life there, I cannot imagine doing it without you. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and when she did not, he gently took her hand. I understand if you need time to think about it. I understand if the answer is no, but I had to ask. I had to at least try. Clara looked down at their joined hands, her smaller one engulfed by his larger, work-roughened palm, and felt something break open inside her, some wall she had built up over years of hurt and hiding. She thought about the life she had been living, the careful invisibility, the constant fear. And then she thought about the evenings on the porch, the easy conversation, the way Dal looked at her as though she were something precious. She thought about the possibility of a different kind of future, one where she was not alone, where she was chosen and wanted and valued. Yes, she said, the word small but certain. Yes, I will marry you. Dal's face split into a grin so wide and genuine that Clara found herself smiling back without thinking, without covering her mouth, just smiling for the pure joy of the moment. And then Dal was laughing and picking her up, spinning her around in a circle right there on the back porch, both of them grinning like fools. They were married 3 days later by a circuit judge who happened to be passing through Tucson. Mrs. Brennan served as witness, her stern face softening into something almost like approval as she watched Dal slip a simple gold band onto Clara's finger. The ceremony was brief and practical, conducted in the front room of the boarding house with the morning sun streaming through the windows. But when the judge pronounced them man and wife, and Dal kissed Clara for the first time, gentle and sweet and full of promise, she felt as though she were stepping into a life she had never dared dream could be hers. They left for the ranch that same afternoon, Clara's few possessions packed into her trunk and loaded onto the wagon Dal had borrowed for the occasion. The ride north took several hours, following a rough track that wound through scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear, the mountains rising blue and distant in every direction. Dal kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks, telling her about the neighbors who were few and far between, preparing her for what she would find. The cabin stood in a small clearing near a creek lined with cottonwood trees, a sturdy adobe structure with a roof that needed patching and windows that needed glass. It was rough and basic, but Clara could see the potential, could imagine it transformed into a real home with work and care. Dal carried her over the threshold despite her laughing protests, setting her down in the main room where a stone fireplace dominated one wall, and the packed earth floor showed the wear of previous inhabitants. I know it is not much, Dal said, suddenly looking uncertain as he took in the bare space through her eyes. But we can fix it up, we can make it good. It is perfect, Clara said and meant it, because it was theirs, a place they would build together, a foundation for the life they would create. She walked through the 2 rooms, noting what needed to be done, planning in her head how they would arrange things, and felt a sense of purpose settle over her like a warm cloak. They spent the next several weeks in a frenzy of activity, working from dawn to dusk to make the cabin livable and start the ranch operations. Dal rode out each day to check the boundaries of their property, to repair fencing, to scout water sources and grazing areas. Clara scrubbed every surface of the cabin until it gleamed, patched holes in the roof with Dal's help, sewed curtains from flour sacks, and planted a small garden near the creek where she hoped vegetables might grow before the winter cold arrived. They worked together to whitewash the inside walls, making the cabin brighter, and Dal surprised her by building a real bed frame to replace the sagging rope bed that had come with the property. In the evenings, after the work was done, and they had eaten whatever simple meal Clara had managed to prepare on the temperamental stove, they would sit outside and watch the sunset, Dal's arm around Clara's shoulders, both of them tired but satisfied. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories from their pasts, making plans for the future, learning the rhythms of being married, of being partners. Dal was patient and gentle with Clara, understanding without being told that she needed time to adjust to being touched, to being close to another person after so many years of isolation. He never pushed, never demanded, just offered steady affection and let her come to him in her own time. And gradually, as the days passed, Clara found herself relaxing, found herself leaning into his embrace, initiating touches of her own, smiling openly and often without the reflexive shame that had governed her for so long. One evening in late September, as they sat by the creek watching the stars emerge, Dal said, "You have been smiling so much lately. It makes me happy every time I see it." Clara turned to look at him, this man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had valued her when she felt worthless, who had changed her entire world with his kindness and his belief in her. "I never thought I could be this happy," she admitted. "I never thought anyone would want me, would choose me." "Then you were thinking wrong," Dal said firmly, pulling her closer. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Clara Dalton. I thank God every day that I walked into that boarding house and met you." She kissed him then, still sometimes startled by the freedom to do so, by the knowledge that he wanted her kisses, crooked teeth and all. And when he smiled against her lips, she felt beautiful for perhaps the first time in her life. October brought cooler temperatures and the arrival of Dal's first cattle, 30 head purchased from a rancher downsizing his operation. They were a mixed lot, lean-range cattle that would need careful management to thrive, but they represented the foundation of the ranch's future. Dal spent long days riding the property, checking on the herd, moving them to better grazing, watching for signs of illness or predators. Clara managed the cabin and the increasingly productive garden, learning to preserve what she grew, learning the rhythms of ranch life. The isolation could be challenging at times. Their nearest neighbors were 5 miles away, and trips to town for supplies happened only once or twice a month. But Clara found she did not mind the solitude the way she might have expected. After so many years of trying to disappear in crowded spaces, there was something healing about the wide-open landscape, the silence broken only by wind and birdsong and the distant lowing of cattle. And she was never truly alone, not with Dal there, his presence a constant comfort and source of strength. She also discovered that she enjoyed the work of building a home, of creating something from nothing. She made soap from rendered fat and lye, learning through trial and error. She baked bread in the finicky oven, eventually mastering its quirks. She tended chickens that Dal brought home one day, laughing at their antics as they scratched in the yard. Each small accomplishment felt like a victory, proof that she was capable, that she had value beyond just surviving. November brought rain, blessed relief after the dry months, and the landscape transformed almost overnight, brown turning to green as dormant plants burst into growth. The creek ran higher, and Dal worked to improve the watering system for the cattle, digging channels and building up earthen barriers to direct the flow. Clara helped when she could, though she still lacked the strength for the heaviest labor. But she was learning, her body adapting to the physical demands of ranch life, muscles developing where before there had been only the wiry thinness of someone who never quite got enough to eat. One evening in late November, as Clara was preparing supper, she heard riders approaching and felt a flutter of nervousness. They so rarely had visitors. Dal came in from the corral where he had been mending tack, his hand resting briefly on her shoulder in reassurance before he went to meet whoever was coming. Clara heard voices, Dal's and 2 others, deep and male. She smoothed her apron and instinctively raised her hand toward her mouth before catching herself, forcing it back down. She was working on that, on not hiding, on accepting Dal's insistence that she had nothing to be ashamed of. It was a hard habit to break, but she was trying. The door opened, and Dal entered followed by 2 men, both weathered and lean in the way of those who spent their lives outdoors. "Clara, These are our neighbors from over the ridge, Tom and Samuel Carr. They are brothers working their family's ranch. Gentlemen, this is my wife, Clara." The men removed their hats, nodding politely, and Clara managed to greet them without covering her mouth, offering them coffee and the biscuits she had made that morning. The Carr brothers accepted gratefully, settling at the table and launching into conversation with Dal about cattle prices, water rights, and a mountain lion that had been spotted in the area. Clara listened as she finished preparing the meal, noting that neither man seemed to pay any particular attention to her appearance, that they treated her with the same courtesy they showed Dal. By the time the brothers left, promising to return the favor of hospitality, Clara felt as though she had passed some invisible test. She could do this. She could be a ranch wife, could host neighbors, could participate in the social fabric of this small frontier community. The realization was both empowering and terrifying. Winter arrived in earnest in December, bringing cold winds and occasional snow that dusted the mountains and sometimes reached down into the valley. The cabin, so stifling in summer, now required constant attention to keep warm, and Dal spent days cutting and hauling wood to feed the insatiable fireplace. The cattle grew thick winter coats and clustered near the creek where cottonwoods provided some shelter from the wind. Dal checked on them daily, sometimes returning half-frozen, and Clara would wrap him in blankets and ply him with hot coffee until color returned to his face. Christmas came quietly, just the two of them in the cabin with wind howling outside. Clara had made a special supper from their limited supplies, and Dal surprised her with a gift, a small hand mirror with a carved wooden frame that he had made himself during the long evenings. "So you can see what I see," he said as she unwrapped it, his voice soft. "Someone beautiful." Clara looked at her reflection, really looked for perhaps the first time in years. She saw a face that was thinner than it used to be, tanned from sun and wind, framed by dark hair that she kept in a simple bun. She saw the crooked teeth when she smiled tentatively at her reflection, but she also saw something else. She saw happiness in her eyes, a light that had not been there before. She saw someone who was loved, who was valued, who belonged somewhere. And for the first time, the crooked teeth did not seem to matter quite so much. "Thank you," she whispered, setting the mirror aside carefully and embracing Dal with a fierceness that made him laugh. "For everything, for seeing me, for choosing me." "Always," Dal said, holding her close. "Always and forever, Clara." The new year of 1879 arrived with bitter cold and a determination on both their parts to make the ranch successful. Dal had plans to increase the herd come spring, to improve the infrastructure, to slowly but surely build the operation into something sustainable. Clara threw herself into learning everything she could about ranch management, reading the few agricultural pamphlets Dal had collected, asking questions, observing everything with sharp attention. She also began to venture out more, accompanying Dal on some of his rounds when weather permitted, learning to ride the gentle mare he had purchased for her use. The first few times were terrifying, but Clara discovered she enjoyed the freedom of being on horseback, of covering ground quickly, of seeing the ranch from this new perspective. She learned to recognize the different cattle, to spot signs of trouble, to appreciate the constant vigilance required to keep everything running. In February, they made a trip to Tucson for supplies, their first visit to town since the wedding. Clara felt nervous as they drove the wagon down the familiar streets, worried about seeing people she knew from the boarding house, worried about judgment and scorn. But walking beside Dal, his presence solid and reassuring, she found it easier than expected. A few people greeted them, local merchants and ranchers who knew Dal or knew of him. Mrs. Brennan spotted them outside the general store and came over, her stern face creasing into what might have been a smile. "You look well, Clara," the older woman said, her sharp eyes taking in Clara's face, the healthy color in her cheeks, the way she stood close to Dal with easy familiarity. "Ranch life seems to agree with you." "It does," Clara said, and realized she was smiling, not covering her mouth, just smiling openly. It really does. Mrs. Brennan nodded with satisfaction. Good, I am glad. You deserve happiness. She turned to Dal. You take care of her, you hear me? She is a treasure. Yes, ma'am, Dal said solemnly. I know it. I am reminded every single day. The visit to town became easier after that initial exchange, Clara's confidence growing with each casual interaction. She was no longer invisible, but she also was not the subject of cruel attention. She was just a ranch wife, one of many women working hard to build lives in this territory. The ordinariness of it was a revelation. Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers, the desert transforming into a carpet of gold and purple and white. The cattle thrived on the new grass, and Dal made good on his plan to expand the herd, purchasing another 20 head. He also hired a hand, a young man named Billy who had experience with cattle and was looking for steady work. Billy was barely 19, earnest and hardworking, and he slept in the small lean-to that Dal constructed off the side of the barn. Having another person around took some adjustment, but Clara found she enjoyed having someone to cook for beyond just Dal, enjoyed the livelier conversation at mealtimes. Billy was shy himself, scarred from a childhood accident that had left him with a pronounced limp, and perhaps because of his own challenges, he never seemed to notice or care about Clara's crooked teeth. He just treated her with respect and gratitude for the meals she provided and the occasional mending she did of his clothes. By late spring, the ranch was beginning to feel established, no longer quite so raw and new. The cabin had been expanded with a small addition that served as a pantry and storage area. The garden was producing well, providing fresh vegetables that were a welcome change from the dried and preserved foods of winter. The herd had grown to over 50 head, and Dal was talking about his plans for the coming years, always thinking ahead, always building toward something larger. One evening in May, as they sat outside watching the sunset, Dal said, I have been thinking about something. What is that? Clara asked, leaning against his shoulder, comfortable and content in the warm evening air. About children, Dal said, his tone careful as though he were unsure how she would respond. Whether you would want them, whether you are ready to think about that. Clara was quiet for a moment, considering. The idea of children terrified her on some level, the fear that she would pass on her crooked teeth, that any child of hers would suffer the same cruelty she had endured. But stronger than the fear was the image of a little boy or girl with Dal's blue-gray eyes, learning to ride, helping with the ranch, being raised with love and acceptance. And she trusted Dal completely. If they had children, those children would be taught kindness, would be valued for who they were rather than how they looked. I think I would like that, she said slowly. I think I would like that very much. Dal pulled her closer, kissing the top of her head. Good. Because I cannot think of anything better than a house full of little ones who have your smile and your big heart. Summer brought intense heat once again, but Clara was better prepared for it now, knowing how to pace herself, how to work with the weather rather than against it. She also discovered, with a mixture of excitement and terror, that she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, her monthly courses stopping, a persistent queasiness in the mornings, a tenderness in her breasts that could not be explained away. When she finally told Dal, stammering over the words in her nervousness, he whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her around just as he had on the night of their engagement. We are going to have a baby, he kept saying, wonder in his voice. Clara, we are going to be parents. The pregnancy was not easy. The heat of summer made the nausea worse, and there were days when Clara could barely keep anything down. But Dal was endlessly patient, helping with tasks that became too difficult, fetching water, preparing simple meals when Clara could not bear the smell of cooking. He fussed over her like a mother hen, which Clara found both touching and amusing, and he talked constantly to her belly as the months passed and her shape began to change. Autumn arrived with relief from the heat, and Clara's health improved as the pregnancy progressed into the second trimester. Her belly swelled with undeniable proof of the life growing inside her, and she found herself marveling at the changes in her body, at the flutters of movement that grew stronger with each passing week. Dal attended to her with devoted care, insisting she rest more, worrying over every twinge and pain. In November, they made the trip to Tucson to consult with a doctor, wanting to ensure everything was progressing normally. The doctor, an older man with kind eyes and gentle hands, examined Clara thoroughly and pronounced her healthy, the baby thriving. He gave instructions for the birth, recommending they arrange for a midwife to attend, and sent them on their way with reassurances and best wishes. On the way back to the ranch, Dal reached over and took Clara's hand. "Are you scared?" he asked. "Terrified," Clara admitted, "but also excited. I cannot wait to meet this little person we have made." "Whatever happens," Dal said seriously, "whatever this baby looks like, however they are going to be loved. You know that, right? They are going to grow up knowing they are valued and precious exactly as they are." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, hormones making her emotional, but also genuine gratitude for this man who understood her fears without her having to voice them. "I know," she said. "I know they will." Winter settled over the ranch once more, and Clara grew larger and more uncomfortable as her due date approached. Dal refused to leave the ranch for more than an hour or two at a time, worried that the baby would come while he was gone. He arranged for a midwife from town, a capable woman named Mrs. Ortiz, to be on call, ready to ride out at a moment's notice. The baby decided to arrive on a cold January night in 1880, announcing their impending arrival with sharp pains that woke Clara from a restless sleep. Dal immediately sprang into action, riding through the darkness to fetch Mrs. Ortiz while Billy stayed with Clara, his face white with worry but his presence steadying. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the following day. Mrs. Ortiz was a calming presence, guiding Clara through the contractions, encouraging her when she wanted to give up. And Dal, once he returned with the midwife, never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her face with cool cloths, whispering words of love and encouragement. Finally, as the winter sun was setting on the second day, the baby emerged with a fierce cry that filled the cabin. Mrs. Ortiz worked quickly, cleaning the infant and wrapping them in the soft blankets Clara had prepared, and then placed the bundle in Clara's arms. "You have a son," the midwife said, smiling. "A strong, healthy boy." Clara looked down at the tiny face, red and wrinkled and perfect, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. The baby had a shock of wheat-colored hair like his father, and when he opened his eyes briefly, they were the same storm blue-gray. He was beautiful. He was theirs. Dal leaned over, his own eyes wet with tears, and touched the baby's tiny hand with one finger. "Hello, little man," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "Welcome to the world." They named him James after his father but called him Jamie to avoid confusion. The baby transformed their lives completely, the cabin filling with the sounds of crying and cooing, the ranch work reorganizing around the demands of a newborn. Clara threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything, learning through trial and error, finding her way. Dal was a devoted father, coming in from the range multiple times a day to check on his son, holding the baby with surprising gentleness for someone with such large, work-roughened hands. He would sit by the fire in the evenings, Jamie cradled against his chest, talking to the infant about the ranch, about the cattle, about all the things they would do together when Jamie was older. As the months passed and Jamie grew, Clara watched anxiously for any sign of dental problems, but the baby's gums appeared normal when the first teeth began to emerge. Even if they had not, she reminded herself, it would not matter. Jamie would be loved. He would be taught his worth. He would never know the shame she had carried for so long. Spring of 1880 brought new challenges and new joys. The ranch continued to grow, the herd now numbering over 70 head. Dal hired a second hand to help with the increased workload, and the operation began to turn a real profit, modest but steady. They were building something that would last, something they could pass on to their son someday. Clara had fully come into her own as a ranch wife and mother. The shy, invisible girl who had arrived in Tucson 2 years earlier was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own strength, who smiled freely, who had found her place in the world. She still had moments of self-consciousness, still occasionally caught herself starting to cover her mouth, but those moments grew rarer as time passed. One afternoon in late spring, as she was hanging laundry while Jamie played in a basket nearby, Clara heard riders approaching. She shaded her eyes and saw Dal returning from town with several people, the Carr brothers and a few others she recognized from the area. As they drew closer, she realized they had brought their families, women and children arriving on horseback and in wagons. "Clara," Dal called out, waving. "We have company." It turned out that word had spread about a horse that was causing trouble on the Carr ranch, and several of the area ranchers had come to help round it up. Their wives had decided to make it a social occasion, bringing food and children, turning work into a community gathering. Clara felt a flutter of nervousness as the women dismounted and approached, but she pushed it down, welcoming them with genuine warmth. The day turned into an impromptu celebration, the men heading out to deal with the problem horse while the women gathered at the Dalton cabin, sharing food and conversation while the children played. Clara found herself laughing and talking with these frontier women, swapping stories about the challenges of ranch life, comparing notes on children and gardens and the 100 small struggles that filled their days. One of the women, Ellen Carr, Tom's wife, said, "It is so nice to have more families settling in the area. It can get lonely out here with just men to talk to, no offense to them." "None taken," Clara said, smiling. "I know what you mean. I am grateful you all came." "You have a beautiful smile," Ellen said, the compliment simple and sincere, "and your little Jamie is just precious." Clara felt the old instinct to deflect, to minimize, to hide, but instead she just said, "Thank you. That is very kind." The gathering broke up as evening approached, the men returning successful in their mission, everyone heading home before darkness fell. But the visit had meant more to Clara than she could easily express. She had friends now. She had community. She belonged. As the years passed, the Dalton Ranch continued to thrive. By 1883, the herd had grown to well over 100 head, and Dal was able to purchase an additional section of adjoining land, expanding their operation. The cabin had been substantially enlarged, now a proper 4-room house with glass windows and wooden floors, comfortable and welcoming. The garden had become a small farm, producing enough vegetables to sell the surplus in town. Jamie grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, learning about cattle and horses and the land with eager curiosity. When he was 3, Clara gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, a tiny, serious-faced infant who grew into a fearless toddler. 2 years after that came another son, Robert, completing their family. Clara loved her children with a fierceness that sometimes took her breath away. She made sure they knew they were valued, that they were loved unconditionally, that their worth had nothing to do with their appearance or any arbitrary standard. And she made sure they were taught kindness, to see people for who they were rather than how they looked. All 3 children inherited Dal's wheat-colored hair and storm-colored eyes. Jamie had perfectly straight teeth that emerged without issue. Sarah's came in slightly crooked, and Clara's heart clenched the first time she noticed, old fears rising. But Dal just laughed and said she looked like her mama, and Sarah grinned her crooked grin without a trace of self-consciousness, and Clara realized that she was projecting fears that need not exist. In this family, in this home they had built, there was no room for shame. By 1885, the Daltons were established members of the ranching community, respected and liked by their neighbors. They attended community gatherings, hosted barbecues at their ranch, participated in the informal network of help and support that kept the scattered homesteads functioning. Clara had become something of a local expert on gardening in the challenging climate, and women would sometimes ride over to ask her advice or trade seeds. One evening in late summer, after the children were asleep and she and Dal were sitting on the porch watching the stars, Dal said, "Do you remember that first day I met you, in the boarding house?" "How could I forget?" Clara said, smiling at the memory. "I tried to run away from you." "You did," Dal agreed, laughing. "Practically bolted like a spooked horse, but I saw something in that moment, even though you tried so hard to hide. I saw kindness in your eyes and sadness and strength. And when you smiled, even though you were clearly terrified, I thought it was the sweetest thing I had ever seen." "You really meant that," Clara said, not a question but a statement of wonder. Even after all these years, it still amazed her sometimes that he had seen her truly and chosen her. "I did then, and I do now," Dal said firmly. "You are the best decision I ever made, Clara Dalton. Marrying you, building this life with you, raising our children with you, it is more than I ever dreamed of having." Clara leaned against him, looking out at the ranch they had built together, at the home that held their sleeping children, at the life they had created from nothing but hard work and hope and love. "I never thought I could be this happy," she said. "I never thought I deserved it." "You deserve everything good in this world," Dal said. "And I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life, by the changing seasons, by the growth of their children. Jamie became an excellent horseman, taking on more and more responsibility as he grew older. Sarah proved to have a gift for working with animals, gentle and patient in a way that made even the most skittish creatures trust her. Robert was the dreamer of the family, always asking questions, always wondering about how things worked. In 1888, when Jamie was 8 and already a competent ranch hand in training, Dal decided it was time to significantly expand the operation. He purchased more cattle and more land, pushing the boundaries of the ranch farther into the surrounding territory. It was a risk, requiring investment and debt, but the cattle market was strong and Dal's instincts proved sound. The Dalton Ranch became one of the larger operations in the area, employing several full-time hands and seasonal workers during busy periods. Clara managed the growing household with capable efficiency, overseeing not just the care of her own family but also the meals for the hands, the maintenance of the expanded house, and increasingly the financial record-keeping for the ranch. She discovered she had a head for numbers, keeping meticulous accounts that helped Dal make informed decisions about buying and selling, about when to expand and when to hold back. They prospered, but they also never forgot what it was like to struggle. When neighboring ranchers fell on hard times, the Daltons were there to help, offering work, lending equipment, providing whatever support they could. They gave generously to the church that had been established in the growing town of Tucson, and they opened their home to travelers and neighbors alike. In the spring of 1890, a young woman arrived at their door, dusty and desperate, looking for work. She was rail-thin and exhausted, her clothes worn almost to rags, and she spoke with her hand covering her mouth in a gesture so familiar that Clara felt her heart clench with recognition. The girl's teeth protruded severely, and she clearly expected to be turned away, her eyes already filling with tears as she stammered out her request for any kind of work in exchange for food and a place to sleep. Clara looked at Dal, saw the understanding in his eyes, and turned back to the girl. "What is your name?" "Louisa, ma'am," the girl whispered. "Louisa Henderson." "Well, Louisa, we can always use help around here. Can you cook, clean, work in the garden?" Louisa nodded eagerly, hope flickering across her face. "I can do anything, ma'am. I will work hard, I promise." "I believe you," Clara said gently. "Come inside and let us get you fed, and then we can talk about what needs doing." Over the following weeks, Louisa settled into life at the ranch, slowly losing the hunted look that had marked her when she arrived. She worked tirelessly, grateful for the opportunity, gradually opening up about her background. She had been orphaned young, passed between relatives who did not want her, mocked and scorned for her appearance until she had finally run away, trying to make her way west to California where she hoped she might start over. Clara took the girl under her wing, treating her with the kindness and respect she had once craved so desperately herself. She made sure Louisa knew she was valued, that her worth was not determined by her appearance. And she watched as Dal did the same, greeting Louisa each morning with the same friendly courtesy he showed everyone, never treating her as less than because of her teeth. One evening, as Clara was teaching Louisa to make bread, the girl said quietly, "Why are you so kind to me?" "Most people cannot stand to look at me." Clara paused in her kneading, choosing her words carefully. "Because I know what it is like to be judged for something you cannot help. I know what it is like to feel worthless because people are cruel." She looked at Louisa directly. "But those judgments say everything about the people making them and nothing about you. You are a hard-working, kind person, and that is what matters." Louisa's eyes filled with tears. "Mr. Dalton said something similar. He said my smile was sweet." Clara felt her own eyes prick with tears at the echo of words that had changed her life so many years ago. "My husband is a very wise man," she said softly, "and he is right. You have a sweet smile, Louisa. You should never be afraid to use it." Louisa stayed with them for 2 years, becoming part of the extended ranch family, growing in confidence and capability. Eventually, she caught the eye of one of the ranch hands, a quiet man named Peter who treated her with gentle respect and obvious affection. They were married in the summer of 1892, and Dal helped Peter establish his own small homestead on a parcel of land near the Dalton Ranch. Clara stood up with Louisa at the wedding, thinking about the chain of kindness, about how one person's compassion could ripple out to change multiple lives. The Dalton children grew into capable young adults, each finding their own path while remaining deeply connected to the ranch and to each other. Jamie took on more and more of the ranch management as Dal began to slow down, his body bearing the accumulated wear of decades of hard labor. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son in 1895, a good man who loved her completely, crooked teeth and all. Robert went to school in Tucson, studying engineering, though he returned to the ranch every chance he got. Clara, now in her late 30s, looked at her life with profound gratitude. The frightened, ashamed girl she had been seemed like a different person, someone from a distant past. She had built a life beyond anything she had imagined possible, had raised children who were confident and kind, had loved and been loved with a depth that still took her breath away sometimes. One evening in the autumn of 1896, as she and Dal sat on the porch of the house they had expanded and improved over 18 years of marriage, Dal reached over and took her hand, the gesture as natural and comfortable as breathing. "I have been thinking," he said, "about how we got here. About all the choices and chances that led to this life. And," Clara prompted, smiling at him in the fading light, "and I am just grateful," Dal said simply. "For that day I walked into the boarding house, for the courage to ask you to marry me, for every single day since then. You made me into the man I wanted to be, Clara. You gave me a reason to build something lasting." "You did the same for me," Clara said, squeezing his hand. "You saw me when I was invisible. You valued me when I felt worthless. You loved me when I could not love myself." She paused, then added, "You saved me, Dal." "No," Dal said gently. "We saved each other. That is what love does. It lifts us up, makes us stronger, helps us become who we are meant to be." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars emerged, the sounds of the ranch settling for the night around them. Inside, they could hear their youngest, Robert, talking with Jamie about some new idea for improving the watering system. Somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. A coyote called from the hills and another answered. This was home. This was family. This was the life they had built together from nothing but hope and hard work, and the kind of love that saw past surfaces to the heart beneath. As the years continued to roll by, the Dalton Ranch remained a fixture in the community, a place known for good cattle, honest dealing, and generous hospitality. Dal and Clara grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies slowing, but their love as strong as ever. They welcomed grandchildren into the world, delighting in Jamie's sons and Sarah's daughters, watching as a new generation began to learn the rhythms of ranch life. In 1900, they celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary with a gathering of family and friends, the ranch house full of laughter and music. Clara looked around at the crowd, at the children playing, at the neighbors who had become dear friends, at her adult children and their families, at the man who had changed everything by seeing her truly and loving her completely. Someone asked her to make a toast, and Clara stood, her hand no longer rising automatically to cover her mouth, comfortable in her own skin in a way she never thought possible. She smiled at the crowd, that crooked smile that Dal had called the sweetest thing he had ever seen, and raised her glass. "To family," she said, her voice clear and strong. "To love that sees us as we truly are, to building lives that matter, and to second chances which are sometimes first chances in disguise." The crowd cheered and drank, and Dal came to stand beside her, his arm around her waist, his presence as solid and reassuring as it had been on that first day 18 years ago. They had built something remarkable together, something that would outlast them, a legacy of love and kindness and the belief that every person had value, regardless of how they looked or where they came from. As the party continued around them, Dal leaned down and kissed Clara's temple, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Still the sweetest smile I have ever seen." And Clara, who had once hidden that smile from the world, just grinned up at him, full of joy and gratitude and the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. The ranch continued to thrive as the new century dawned, adapting to changing times while maintaining the core values that Dal and Clara had established from the beginning. Jamie took over more and more of the day-to-day management, proving himself a capable and innovative rancher. He introduced new breeding techniques and improved irrigation methods, ensuring the ranch would remain competitive even as the cattle industry evolved. Sarah and her husband Peter managed their own successful homestead nearby, staying close to the family ranch. Their children, 2 daughters and a son, were frequent visitors, filling the Dalton home with youthful energy. Robert completed his engineering studies and returned to apply his knowledge to the ranch, designing better systems for water distribution and building improved structures that made the work more efficient. Dal's health began to decline in 1902, the decades of hard physical labor taking their inevitable toll. He developed arthritis that made riding difficult and a persistent cough that worried Clara. But he remained involved in the ranch operations as much as he was able, offering advice and wisdom, taking pride in watching his children and grandchildren carry on what he had started. Through it all, Clara remained his constant companion and support. She managed the household with the same efficiency she always had, though she too felt the effects of age and hard work. But more importantly, she was there beside Dal, holding his hand through painful nights, encouraging him on difficult days, reminding him of all they had built together. One evening in the spring of 1903, as they sat together watching yet another sunset paint the sky in brilliant colors, Dal said, "I want you to know something, Clara. Every single day of our marriage has been a gift. Every moment with you has been more than I deserved." "Do not talk like that," Clara said, though she felt tears prick at her eyes. "You deserve everything good, Dal. You are the best man I have ever known." "I am serious," Dal insisted, turning to look at her with those storm-colored eyes that had first captured her attention 25 years ago. "I want you to promise me something. When I am gone, whenever that is, I want you to keep living fully. Keep smiling that sweet smile. Keep loving our children and grandchildren. Keep being the remarkable woman you are." "Dal," Clara protested, but he squeezed her hand. "Promise me, Clara." Promise me you would not hide again, would not go back to being invisible. You are too precious for that." "I promise," Clara whispered, tears flowing freely now, "but you are not going anywhere for a long time yet. We still have years ahead of us." Dal smiled, though they both knew it might not be true. "However long we have, it will never be enough, but I am grateful for every second." They sat together until the stars came out, holding hands, drawing comfort from each other's presence, treasured each moment of the life they had shared. Dal passed away peacefully in his sleep on a cool October morning in 1904, with Clara beside him and his children gathered close. He was 52 years old, worn out by hard work and harder living, but he died knowing he had lived well, had loved deeply, and had left a legacy that would endure. Clara grieved him deeply, the loss cutting to her very core. But she kept her promise, continuing to live fully, to engage with her family and community, to be present rather than retreating into the shadows of invisibility. She found comfort in her children and grandchildren, in the daily rhythms of ranch life, in the home she and Dal had built together. She often sat on the porch in the evenings, in the spot where they had spent so many hours talking and planning and simply being together. Sometimes she would tell the grandchildren stories about their grandfather, about his kindness and his wisdom, about how he had seen her when others looked past her, about the life they had built from nothing but love and determination. "Your grandfather used to say I had the sweetest smile he had ever seen," she would tell them, smiling that crooked smile that had once been a source of shame but had become a symbol of love and acceptance. "Even though my teeth were all crooked and people used to be cruel about it. But he saw past all of that to who I really was. He taught me that real beauty is not about perfect teeth or smooth skin. It is about kindness and courage and love." The grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, absorbing the lesson, learning about compassion and seeing beyond surfaces. And Clara would think about the invisible girl she had been, the woman she had become, and the man who had made all the difference. Clara lived for another 15 years, dying peacefully in her sleep in 1919 at the age of 63. She was surrounded by family until the end, beloved by her children and grandchildren, respected throughout the community as a matriarch who embodied grace, kindness, and strength. The ranch continued under Jamie's management, then passed to his sons, the Dalton legacy carrying forward through generations. Years later, when Clara's great-grandchildren asked about the old photographs that hung in the ranch house, showing a tall cowboy with storm-colored eyes and a woman with a crooked but radiant smile, they would be told the story. The story of two people who found each other in a boarding house in Tucson in 1878, who built a life together against all odds, who proved that real love sees past surfaces to the soul beneath. And the story always ended the same way, with the words that had changed everything, the words that had given a frightened young woman the courage to believe in her own worth. He said she had the sweetest smile he had ever seen, and he meant it. And because he meant it, she learned to believe it too. That is what love does. It shows us who we really are. The Dalton Ranch still stands today, though much changed and modernized. But the original adobe cabin, the one where Dal and Clara started their life together, has been preserved, maintained by generations of family as a reminder of where they came from, of what their ancestors built with nothing but determination and love. And in the evening, when the sun sets over the mountains and paints the sky in brilliant colors, visitors sometimes report seeing shadows on the old porch, two figures sitting close together, holding hands, watching the stars emerge. Just shadows, they say, just tricks of the light. But the family knows better. They know that some love is strong enough to outlast even death, that some bonds cannot be broken by time or distance or even the final separation. They know that Dal and Clara built something that would endure not just in land and cattle and buildings, but in the hearts of everyone they touched, everyone who learned from their example that real worth has nothing to do with appearance, that real beauty shines from within, that love sees truly and loves completely. It all started with a cowboy who saw a scared young woman with crooked teeth and recognized the sweet soul beneath. Who chose her when others overlooked her? Who loved her when she could not love herself? Who built a life with her that became a legacy of compassion and acceptance, and the transformative power of being truly seen? That is the story of Dal and Clara Dalton, ranchers and pioneers, husband and wife, partners in every sense of the word. A love story set against the harsh beauty of the Arizona Territory in the late 1800s, proving that sometimes the most unlikely connections become the strongest bonds, that sometimes the greatest love stories start with the simplest acts of kindness. And at the heart of it all, one simple truth that changed everything: she was ashamed of her crooked teeth and smile. The cowboy said it was the sweetest thing he had seen, and because he said it and meant it and showed it through a lifetime of love and devotion, she learned to believe it. That belief transformed not just her life, but the lives of everyone who came after, rippling out through generations. A legacy of love that began with one man's ability to see past surfaces to the beautiful soul beneath, and one woman's courage to believe him, to trust him, to build a life with him that would stand as a testament to the power of acceptance, kindness, and love that sees truly. Their story is finished now, told and retold through the decades, embroidered and refined, but always returning to that central truth. Real love sees who we truly are. Real love values us not for how we look, but for who we are in our hearts. Real love transforms everything it touches, making us stronger, braver, better than we ever thought we could be. Dal and Clara Dalton proved that truth through 26 years of marriage, through the ranch they built, through the children they raised, through the community they helped create. They proved it through every smile Clara no longer hid, through every kindness they extended to those who were struggling, through every moment they chose to see the best in each other and in the world around them. And when the story is told now, whether to children gathered around a fire or to visitors touring the historic ranch, or to anyone who needs to hear that they have value regardless of how they look, it always ends with hope. Because if a frightened, ashamed young woman with crooked teeth could find love and acceptance and build a remarkable life in the harsh frontier of 1878, then anyone can. If one person's kindness could transform a life so completely, then we all have that power. If love could see past surfaces to the soul beneath, then that is how we should all strive to see each other. That is the legacy of Dal and Clara Dalton. Not just a successful ranch or a large family, but a lesson in what it means to truly see another person, to value them for who they are rather than how they appear, to build something lasting on the foundation of acceptance and love. And somewhere, perhaps in the shadows on an old porch, perhaps just in the hearts of those who remember their story, Dal and Clara still sit together, watching the sunset, holding hands, proof that the greatest love stories are not about perfection. They are about seeing clearly, loving completely, and building a life together that transcends every limitation, every challenge, every cruelty the world might offer. She was ashamed of her crooked teeth and smile. The cowboy said it was the sweetest thing he had seen. And because of that, because of him, because of the love they built together, she learned to smile freely, to live fully, to love completely. And that made all the difference. The end of their earthly story is just the beginning of their legacy, continuing through generations, reminding everyone who hears it that we all have value, that we all deserve to be seen and loved for who we truly are, that the crooked places in our lives, the things we are ashamed of, might just be the sweetest parts to someone who truly sees us. That is the gift Dal gave Clara. That is the gift their story gives to everyone who hears it, the gift of being truly seen, truly valued, truly loved. And that gift, more than land or cattle or any material legacy, is what endures. That is what matters. That is what changes the world, one person, one smile, one act of kindness at a time. And so the story concludes not with tragedy or separation, but with the knowledge that love this true, this deep, this transformative never really ends. It continues in the hearts of those who knew them, in the lives of those they touched, in the legacy they built together. It continues every time someone chooses kindness over cruelty, acceptance over judgment, love over fear. Dal and Clara Dalton lived, loved, built, and left behind something far more valuable than a prosperous ranch. They left behind proof that one person's compassion can change everything, that seeing someone truly is the greatest gift we can give, that love which accepts us completely, crooked teeth and all, is the most transformative force in the world. Their story is complete. Their legacy continues. And the simple truth at its heart remains as powerful now as it was in that boarding house in Tucson in 1878. When someone truly sees us, truly values us, truly loves us for exactly who we are, we become capable of anything. We become who we were always meant to be. We find home. That is the story of the cowboy and the woman with the crooked smile, who built a life together in the Arizona Territory and proved that the greatest love stories are not about perfection, but about being perfectly seen. And it is a story with a truly happy ending because they found each other, they chose each other, and they loved each other completely for all the days they were given and beyond.